This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service.
Manx Radio.
Today I've got a story for you about keeping faith when tragedy strikes, a story from Mexico, a Manx Carval, and if you were in the Manx Children's Choir 20 years ago, you might be listening to yourself singing a little later in the programme. Many church services today will centre around the story of John the Baptist, the young man who, having lived a life of prayer and self-denial in the desert, then began travelling from town to town, telling people that he, John, was preparing the way for the coming of someone really great. He encouraged them to put aside old ways and live good and honest lives and be baptised in the River Jordan as a sign of their new life. And that story is told in our first hymn. On Jordan's bank, the Baptist cry announces that the Lord is nigh. On Jordan's bank, the Baptist's cry announces that the Lord is nigh. The story of John the Baptist announcing the coming of the Messiah is also told in a Manx Carval, Urian Bashti, which we'll hear a little later in the programme. But now let's meet a recent visitor to the island. She's Rev'd Sharon Grenham-Thompson, a priest in the Church of England for more than 25 years. She's also a former prison chaplain and was once a solicitor. For over 20 years, she's been scriptwriting and broadcasting on BBC Radio 2 and on BBC Radio 4. In fact, she's been on the daily service on Radio 4 Extra just this last week. So, as you can imagine, we had no shortage of things to talk about when I had the chance to interview her. We talked about how she came to give up being a solicitor and train for ordination. We talked about her prison ministry and her interest in the life of St Francis of Assisi. And all of that will feature in a future programme. But the part of our conversation that I'd like to share with you now starts off in the world of radio. But as you'll hear, leads into the tragic subject of the death of Sharon's son, Leo, just 3 years ago at the age of 17. But before there was any hint that that was where our conversation was going to lead, I began by asking Sharon how she first got involved in Christian broadcasting.
It just happened by chance in lots of ways. Back when I was working in Milton Keynes in my curacy, we had a particularly good choir, and the World Service had heard about that. And they said, oh, well, we'd like a little service and we'd like to feature your choir, and we need a clergy person, just to do the holy bit. And it just so happened that I was the person on duty in the church that day. So that, yes, fine, they said. They didn't know who I was. Yes, you do it. So I worked alongside their presenter, and afterwards he said, oh, I think I might have a word with someone. And so he spoke to his producer, who spoke to somebody else, and then I found myself getting an email saying, oh, would you like to come and meet this person? So I started out on Radio 2 in the middle of the night on the Janice Long show, doing a pre-recorded Pause for Thought. From there, I then was asked to do some Sunday worship on Radio 4, and then asked if I would do the daily service, and it sort of grew and grew. And then after that, I was involved in a couple of little documentaries and things. And then I was invited to go and try for Pause for Thought with Chris Evans on Radio 2 Breakfast Show. So I went along, tried out, they liked me, and I spent 7 years doing Pause for Thought with Chris. That was the most amazing time, it really was. I met all sorts of people. Brian May, who said, you don't look anything like a vicar. John Cleese, who's quite reserved about the church, it has to be said, because of his experiences with Life of Brian. And all sorts of other people, Bananarama, Beautiful South. So that was absolutely fabulous time. It was challenging, though. It really was, because they said you need to get some sort of pithy thought, something fun, accessible, but deep at the same time, all into 90 seconds.
It's the preparing it beforehand and making it sound like you haven't prepared it that is the tricky part, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, there's a real difference between reading something out that's written and actually presenting it as the spoken word. Those are two very different things. But because you have to write it all out, because they have to check you're not going to say anything dodgy, you still have to make that turn into something that sounds okay spoken. And then someone like Chris Evans will just throw something into the mix and you have to react. But that's the fun of it. It's what I loved so much. Live radio is it's amazing. It's great.
It is, but we put out what we do and we have no idea who is listening, or indeed if anybody is listening. You just have to put it there and hope that it will work in the way that God wants it to work.
Yes, absolutely. You're doing your best and you're putting your heart into it and you really mean what you're saying and doing. And then you have to just leave it. And as you say, let it be in God's hands. So who receives it, who hears it, you just don't know. And it's actually a great reminder as well that even if you do something that gets you a bit of notice, don't think yourself too important, because you don't know what's going to happen with that. And in the end, it's God's work, not yours. It's a good check to the ego, which it would be very easy to sort of think, I'm saying all these wise things. But, sometimes as well, it's humbling when you get things wrong.
I'm talking here with Anglican Priest Sharon Grenham-Thompson about her religious broadcasting on BBC Radio 2 and Radio 4, something she's done for over 20 years. But it was one particular programme that she was asked to produce and present that reopened the tragic memory of the death of her 17-year-old son, Leo.
A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of making a programme. It was not long after my son had died. And we made a programme about how Mary must have felt at the cross, seeing her son dead. That was a difficult one for me to make, but it was a way for me to, I suppose, in my own self, explore that experience, but also be very open with those listening about these difficult experiences. It's very easy, isn't it, when you think about either public figures or clergy, you think, well, they've got their life together and faith will get them through and all those sorts of things. Actually, I've tried, particularly since that event in life, tried to be very honest about how difficult life can be. And that just because you're a member of the clergy or pray every day or any of those things, it doesn't mean you're immune from difficulty. And then faith is about finding the way through that, finding the pathway, finding God again. And I make no bones of the fact that for a while I wasn't really sure whether my faith was still there or not. And I think that honesty is what's so important when you're communicating as well, because so many people will face great hardships in their life. And if our faith is worth anything, if my faith is worth anything, it's got to be able to be with people in the hardships as well as the good bits of life.
When you chose to reflect upon Mary losing her son, Were you asked to do that because of your own experience?
Yes, I was asked by the BBC team because, they've become great friends over the years and they knew what had happened. They knew what I was like in that I'm a communicator. That's what I do, and I work things out externally and talk and share. Very sensitive about it. And they said, if you really don't feel this is right, then absolutely fine. But we wonder if your experience and this parallel might be something that would be helpful. And I reflected and thought that, yes, maybe it would. It would be helpful to those listening, might also be helpful to me as well. So I gave it a go.
And was it helpful to you?
Yes, I think it was, because of one part of the programme I had to meet others who'd been bereaved and talk with them through their experiences, and we mused together on what faith meant. But it also gave me that space to reflect on Mary, the mother of Jesus, and we often sort of see her again as this sort of rather distant, beautiful, ethereal sort of figure, usually young woman Mary giving birth. And actually here was Our Lady of Sorrows, as she's sometimes known, the older woman whose son had just been executed, had just died in the most horrific manner. And I suspect no matter how much she believed in him, she must have still been wondering, literally, God, what are you doing? Why? And I felt a great affinity with her as I was doing that. And the more you dig into these stories of Jesus' life, but also those around him, the more all these facets of our human experience come out. And I think faith has so much to help us with in those. It's so easy for us to think that the Christian faith is all about the good times and, all the pomp and circumstance, as wonderful as all of that is. But it's there for us when we're struggling in the mud as well. And that's where, the power of it really shows, I think.
When it's okay to doubt and be angry and rage and come through that to another understanding.
Absolutely. I think that's right. And I wonder if people are worried about the doubting and the raging. I mustn't, I shouldn't, I would be a bad Christian if I think all those things. My goodness, I've been through all of that. After Leo, that's my son, after he died, I remember driving in my car one day and just shouting at God. I was furious that this could have happened. But, what's come through for me and what's helped me through so much is the love that I have been able to encounter from other people, the kindness, total strangers on Twitter, of all places, and things like that, the kindness and the gentleness and the people moving to be alongside you and beside you. And that's when you understand that love really is the key to our existence, and it really is the bedrock of our faith as well. That what Jesus came to tell us more than anything is love one another. Because this world, I am not someone who believes that God sends these terrible things to us to try us and test us. God isn't capricious and wicked and awful like that. But I think where we can find God in those darkest times is in the love that we just about cling on to, but that we can share with one another. That's what it's all about. That's what gets us through.
Anglican priest and broadcaster Rev'd Sharon Grenham-Thompson being very open about holding on to her faith through the love of others following the tragic death of her 17-year-old son, Leo. And now from my music archive, a 20-year-old recording of the Manx Children's Choir. They're conducted by Mrs Adele Parsons and accompanied by Mrs Jennifer Bird.
Said that for God's people
the Manx Children's Choir and One Day in Time. And that recording was made almost 20 years ago, with Mrs Adele Parsons conducting and Mrs Jennifer Bird accompanying. The Manx Children's Choir has given countless youngsters the experience of singing as a group, with membership changing each year as children grow and move on. Does that bring back any memories for you? I really do hope so. Now, I wonder if you will give or receive a poinsettia plant as a Christmas gift. If you do, as you admire its beautiful red flowers, you might like to think about the story that writer and broadcaster Richard Littledale brings to us now.
It's all about a little girl called Pepita, and it is set in Mexico. Come with me to the back streets on the outskirts of the big city, and I'll tell you all about it. You'll have to pick your way carefully, mind, as the streets are narrow here and fuller than ever. Squeezed into these tiny houses where the poorer people live, there are cousins and aunties and uncles and other relations so distant that nobody can quite remember where they fit in. It seems like the houses are elastic today as more and more people squeeze in. Everywhere, it seems, there are children darting about, in and out of the kitchens, ducking between the legs of the old and jumping over the outstretched feet of the weary. Most are shrieking with glee and their excitement is mounting. Most, but not all. Pepita refuses to join in. She won't chase the little ones or swap stories with the older ones. She holds herself apart, as if dreading the celebrations, rather than looking forward to them. In the end, it is a favourite uncle who gets to the root of the problem. On Christmas night, all the families, even from these tiny houses, will make their way through the darkened streets to the great cathedral. As proud parents and relations look on, the children will file up to the front and place their gifts at the crib of the baby Jesus in the nave. Wiping away a tear, Pepita tells her uncle that she is ashamed to go because she has no gift to give. All the family's money has been spent, and she has nothing. Dear one, the uncle explained, the simplest gift, even a bunch of weeds from the side of the road, will please him if you give it with love in your heart. Pepita wasn't sure. All the same, when no one was looking, she stooped down on their way to the great cathedral and plucked a bunch of weeds in her hand. As the queue inched forward in the candlelight at the cathedral, her heart beat faster and faster. Would it really be so? Would it really be, as her uncle had said, that love would somehow transform her meagre gift? When her turn came, she knelt down and screwed her eyes tight shut as she handed over the weeds, wilting slightly from being held so tightly in her hand. As she did so, those weeds were transformed into the glorious crimson plant we have in our homes at Christmas. From that day to this, it has been known in Pepita's native Spanish as the Flores de Nochebuena, the flower of Christmas night, and showed its best colours after 12 hours in the dark.
Thank you, Richard Littledale, and the Mexican legend of the poinsettia plant. Now, as you might imagine, I've got a huge notice board packed with special services that all have one thing in common. There's a warm welcome for everyone. I'd like to tell you now about everything that's happening today, during the coming week, and next weekend too, but it would just make a bewildering amount of information. So what I plan to do is now I'll give you details of all the services and events that I know about today, during the coming week, and next Saturday. Services and events for next Sunday, that's December the 22nd, will all be on the sundown notice board tonight. And we look at our notice board twice during the programme tonight, at 10:15 and 11:15. And I really do hope you'll be able to join me and listen then. So let's begin with services today and during the coming week. And if you don't live too far away, I know of some carol services starting this morning at 11 o'clock. Kirk Santon have one with refreshments afterwards, and so do Crosby Methodist Chapel. This afternoon at 2:30, Bride Methodist Chapel have their nativity with the children leading, with mince pies and shortbreads afterwards. There's no service at Abbeylands today, as they're joining with Union Mills Methodist Chapel at 2:45 for their service with the choir Musicale, and this will be followed by refreshments. In the cathedral in Peel this afternoon, there'll be a festival of lessons and carols starting at 3:30 with music by the choristers and lay clerks of the cathedral. This afternoon at 4, Agnes Chapel have their candlelit carol service, followed by tea and mince pies. And there's lots of opportunities for carol singing in the north today. There's a carol service in Andreas Parish Church this afternoon at 4. Then in the parish church at Ballaugh, there's a carol service at 6:30. And also at 6:30 this evening, there's a carol service in Derby Parish Church. This evening in Dorby schoolrooms, there'll be cafe-style candlelit community carols at 5:30. Gather round the wood burner in Dorby schoolrooms with hot punch and mince pies and a menu of carols to choose from. Tonight at 6:30, there'll be a carol service in the Abbey Church in Ballasalla with a variety of music and refreshments to follow. And also at 6:30 tonight, there'll be a candlelit carol service at Glenmay Methodist Chapel, followed by tea and mince pies. Moving into the week ahead now, and the Cool Chapel have 2 carol services this week. On Tuesday evening, there's a candlelit carol service starting at 7 o'clock. This will be led by Reverend Steve Ingruel and will include items from the young people and Christine Bragazzi, with refreshments afterwards. Then the following day, that's Wednesday the 18th, the Cool Chapel will host a short lunchtime carol service starting at 1:15, when members of the Isle of Man Business Park will take part. Again, refreshments will be served afterwards, and the Cool Chapel is very easy to find on Cool Road, just across the roundabout at the top of the business park. Also on Wednesday the 18th, there's an evening of carols and readings in St Matthew's Church on the North Quay here in Douglas, starting at 6:30. There'll be special guest soloists and a choir conducted by John Riley. Gareth Moore is the organist. There'll be seasonal refreshments in the hall afterwards and a retiring collection in support of the RNLI. Moving on to next Saturday the 21st, and in St Thomas's Church, just off the promenade here in Douglas, the Scouts and Guides will gather for this year's Peace Light service starting at 6:30. And also on Saturday the 21st at 6:30, it's the very popular Christmas in the Barn at Ballacregan Farm on Sound Road in Glenmay. Traditional carols, nativity scenes and animals, and music by Crosby Silver Band. Children are welcome to come dressed up to join in the nativity scenes, but there will be costumes available if children come early. Sound Road is at the bottom of the hill in Glenmay, and the farm is at the end of the road. There's plenty of parking at the farm, or alternatively park at the Waterfall car park and walk the short distance down to the farm. But for your safety, do please use a torch. Well, at the start of the programme, I promised you a Manx Carval, and here it is. It's Arian Bashti, John the Baptist, announcing the coming of the Messiah, and it's sung for us by Sarah Hewson and Julie Matthews.
Uns pura spirit Elias fei, manach nay. Do the agent at it may I be feather you. The chroma she's the haze the red, couldn't hand elmish few.
Manx Carval, Urian Bashti, sung by Sarah Hewson and Julie Matthews. And I'm afraid that's all we've time for now, but I'll be back later with Sundown, tonight from 9 o'clock onwards, with lots of Christmas notice board news at 10:15 and again at 11:15, plus easy listening music and your requests and dedications. And I'd love you to join me. So, till whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for listening, and I wish you and those you love a happy and hope-filled Advent week, and a very good morning.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.